The conference room on the second floor of First Pulaski Bank smelled like new carpet and expensive coffee. Derek Whitmore, 34 years old, slid the yellowed document across the polished mahogany table with 2 fingers, like it was something unclean. "Mr. Tate," he said, adjusting the cuff of his tailored shirt, "I've had 3 attorneys look at this artifact, and I'll tell you what every one of them said." He smiled. The kind of smile a man uses when he thinks he has already won. It's worthless, a relic, a handshake agreement from a time when bankers wore boots. The room held 6 people, 2 loan officers, a junior attorney from Nashville, Derek's assistant, and Harold Tate, 76 years old, sitting in a folding chair because Derek hadn't bothered to offer him one of the leather ones. Harold said nothing. He adjusted his suspenders. He looked at the paper. His hands, large and weathered and spotted with 70 summers of Tennessee sun, rested quietly on his knees. Derek laughed, a short bark of a sound. "Sir, do you understand what I'm telling you? This farm is going to be restructured under current market terms, 8.15%, 60 days, that's the offer. Take it or we foreclose." Harold picked up the 1968 contract. He folded it slowly. He placed it in the inside pocket of his canvas jacket, and he stood up without a word. 3 days later, that same Derek Whitmore sat in a courtroom in downtown Pulaski, staring at his own shoes, unable to meet the eyes of a 76-year-old farmer he had publicly humiliated. Because Harold Tate had known something for more than half a century. And on page 4 of that so-called worthless document, his father had left behind a trap. Harold Tate lived on 240 acres in Giles County, Tennessee, about 11 miles south of Pulaski, on a stretch of 2-lane blacktop that ran through hill country so green it looked painted. He was 76 years old, born in 1949 in a farmhouse his grandfather had built from hand-cut chestnut in 1918. He had inherited the farm on April 12, 1971, 3 months after his father Walter Tate died of a heart attack in the North Hayfield. The farm had been in the family for 4 generations. Harold was a quiet man. He wore the same brand of work boots he had worn since 1978, brown leather, double-stitched, resoled twice. He drove a 1994 Ford F-150 with 287,000 miles on the odometer, and a toolbox in the bed that hadn't been replaced since 2001. He paid cash for his groceries. He paid his property tax on the first Monday of October every year in person at the county clerk's office. He had been married to Margaret for 46 years. She died in the spring of 2019, and he buried her on the rise behind the farmhouse, under the old white oak his father had planted in 1952. He had not remarried. He had not considered it. In Giles County, folks knew Harold Tate by 3 things. He never broke a promise, he never raised his voice, and he never, ever forgot a debt, not one he owed, and not one he was owed. If you borrowed a post-hole digger from Harold in March, he would not mention it again. But on a Tuesday in October, you would find him standing at the end of your driveway, waiting, and you would remember. He kept every receipt he had ever signed, every letter he had ever received, every tax document since 1971. They were stored in cedar cigar boxes on the top shelf of the root cellar, each box labeled in pencil, each receipt folded twice and ordered by date. There was a box labeled 1968. It had belonged to his father. Harold had never opened it in the presence of another living soul. But every January since 1972, he had made one specific payment, $47, a nominal service fee to First Pulaski Bank, written out in his own hand, mailed in a stamped envelope, noted in a ledger his father had started in 1968. 54 consecutive years, every January, $47. He had never missed one. Not even the January after Margaret died. He had sat at the kitchen table in the half-dark with his hands shaking, and he had written out that check, because his father had told him to, and because his father had told him why. But Harold had never told anyone else. Not even Margaret, not even his son David, who lived in Knoxville now and called every Sunday. Some things a man carries alone, because he promised he would. In February of 2026, First Pulaski Bank, a family-owned community institution founded in 1947, was acquired by Meridian Capital Partners, a private equity firm headquartered in Nashville. Within 60 days, the old nameplate came down. The old loan officers were let go. The old files were boxed up and shipped to a regional processing center in Brentwood. And Derek Whitmore was installed as the new regional vice president of asset repositioning. Derek was 34, Vanderbilt MBA, class of 2017. He wore slim gray suits from a tailor in Green Hills, drove a matte black European SUV, and kept his dark hair cut every 2 weeks at a barber shop that charged $90. He had a plan, he had a spreadsheet, and he had a portfolio of 11 so-called legacy accounts, old contracts, predating 1980 that his team had flagged as non-compliant with modern portfolio standards. 11 rural farms, 11 families, 11 loose ends he intended to clean up by the end of the second quarter. Harold Tate's file sat at the top of the stack. Derek drove down to Pulaski on a Wednesday morning in a light rain. He parked crooked in front of the bank and walked past the tellers without nodding. He called a meeting for the following Monday at 10 a.m. He told the junior attorney from Nashville to bring the termination package. Harold arrived that Monday at 9:58. He sat in the folding chair Derek's assistant pointed to. He removed his cap. He placed it on his knee. Derek did not introduce himself. He slid a stack of paper across the table. Mr. Tate, your 1968 agreement with this institution is being reassessed. The original terms, and I'll be frank, sir, the original terms are not survivable in today's market. We're prepared to offer you a modern refinancing package. 8.15% interest, 30-year amortization, payments beginning the 1st of next month. Harold looked at the paper. He did not pick it up. Derek leaned back in his chair, arms spread wide, the smile of a man who had done this 11 times before. Or, Derek said, we can exercise the successor institution's right to terminate the legacy agreement. You'd have 60 days to vacate. The bank would take title to the 240 acres in lieu of the outstanding obligation. He paused. It's a generous offer, sir, for a contract my attorneys assure me would not survive a single hearing. He reached out and tapped the yellowed 1968 document his assistant had pulled from the archive. This, he said, is worthless. Harold adjusted his suspenders. He said very quietly, I'd like to take that home and read it if you don't mind. Derek laughed. By all means, Mr. Tate, take your time, 60 days. Harold stood. He walked out of the bank and drove home at the speed limit. Harold did not call his son that night. He did not call a lawyer. He did not pace the kitchen. He did not curse. He walked out to the root cellar behind the farmhouse, unlocked the door with a brass key he kept on a nail above the frame, and pulled the cigar box labeled 1968 down from the top shelf. He carried it into the kitchen. He set it on the oilcloth table that had belonged to his mother. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the percolator, and he sat down. For a long time, he did not open the box. He just looked at it. He remembered being 21 years old in the hospital room in Columbia when his father, gray-faced and thin and 3 weeks from the end, had gripped his wrist with a strength that seemed impossible. Harold, Walter Tate had whispered, when I'm gone, they're going to change, not right away, but in times men like me will die off and men like them will come in, and when they do, they'll come for the farm. Harold had nodded. In the cedar box in the root cellar, the one marked 1968, you keep paying that $47 every January. You don't miss one, not one. Yes, sir. And son, Walter had pulled him closer. When they laugh at that contract and one of them will, you tell your lawyer to read page 4, out loud, in front of a judge. Yes, sir. Don't you read it yourself before then? Don't you show it around? Don't you brag on it? Men who brag on their guns get them taken away. You keep it quiet. You keep paying. And when the day comes, you walk in calm, and you let the paper do the talking. Yes, sir, Daddy. That was the last real conversation they ever had. Walter Tate died 9 days later. For 54 years, Harold had kept his promise. He had paid the $47, he had stored the receipts, he had not opened the box, he had not read page 4, he had not spoken of it to Margaret, to his son, to anyone. Now at the kitchen table he lifted the lid. Inside was a bound document, 41 pages long, typed on an IBM Selectric, stamped with the original seal of First Pulaski Bank and signed in 1968 by Walter Tate, by the bank's then president Edgar Moon, and by a witness, an attorney named Hollis Crane of the firm Crane and Associates, Pulaski, Tennessee. Harold ran his thumb along the edge of the papers. He did not read page 4. He closed the box, he picked up the rotary phone in the hallway, and he dialed a number he had memorized but never used. A voice answered on the third ring. Crane Law Office. This is Harold Tate. I need to see Mitchell. My daddy told me to call him when the day came. There was a long pause on the other end. Mr. Tate, the woman said, Mr. Crane will see you tomorrow morning at 8. Walter Tate had been dead for 54 years. But he had still managed to set a trap. Mitchell Crane was 68 years old. He had practiced law in Pulaski for 42 years. His father, Hollis Crane, had practiced before him from 1951 until 1994. The firm's wood-paneled office sat 3 doors down from the courthouse, and the bookshelves inside held every bound Tennessee legal record from 1887 to the present. Mitchell had known Harold Tate for most of his life. They had ridden the same school bus. They had played on the same little league team in 1960. They had never been close, but they had always respected each other. Harold walked into the office at 7:58 on a Tuesday morning, carrying the cigar box under his arm. Mitchell stood up from behind his desk. Harold. Mitchell. Harold placed the box on the desk and sat down. My daddy told me a long time ago that if a man from the bank ever called this contract worthless, I was to bring it to your father. Your father's been gone 20 years now, so I'm bringing it to you. Mitchell's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Your father did business with my father in 1968, he said. Yes, sir. I remember him talking about it once, just once. He said Walter Tate was the shrewdest man he ever drew up papers for. Mitchell opened the box. He lifted out the document. He put on his reading glasses. He turned to page 1. He read for 4 minutes in silence. Page 2, page 3. Then he turned to page 4. Mitchell Crane had not been visibly surprised in a courtroom for 20 years. He was not a dramatic man. He was a careful man, a slow man, the kind of lawyer who won cases by walking, not running. But when he read page 4, he sat back in his chair. He took off his glasses. He pinched the bridge of his nose. And he said very quietly, My God, Walter, you thought of everything. Harold waited. Mitchell turned the document around and placed his finger on a single paragraph, about 2/3 of the way down page 4. He read it aloud. In consideration of the herein conveyed 2-acre parcel, granted by Walter J. Tate to First Pulaski Bank for the sole purpose of branch expansion, the bank and all successor institutions shall maintain, in perpetuity for a term of 99 years from the date of this agreement, a first priority credit standing for the Tate family and their heirs at the original prime rate of 5.5%, non-variable, non-callable, and non-revocable. Any successor institution attempting to alter, terminate, or challenge this covenant shall owe the Tate family, as liquidated damages, a sum equal to 3 times the then appraised fair market value of the remaining acreage, payable within 30 days of breach. Mitchell looked up. Harold, do you know what this means? No, sir, not exactly. It means, Mitchell said, that when your father sold them 2 acres for their drive-through in 1968, he did not take cash. He took protection, for 99 years, at a rate they cannot change, and if they try to break it, they owe you triple the value of your land. Harold was quiet for a long time. How much is that, Mitchell? Mitchell Crane picked up his phone and dialed a land appraiser in Columbia he had worked with for 25 years. The appraiser faxed back within 90 minutes. Current fair market value of 240 acres in Giles County, with road frontage, a creek, and tillable soil, $1,180,000. Times 3. Harold, Mitchell said, if Derek Whitmore files a single piece of paper to foreclose on you, his bank owes you $3,540,000 inside of 30 days. Harold took a long breath. His hands, for the first time in many years, trembled slightly. My daddy did that in 1968. Your daddy, Mitchell said, built a cage, and he handed you the key, and told you not to rattle it until the right man walked in. Derek Whitmore walked in. Yes, he did. Mitchell leaned back. Harold, you let me handle this. We are not going to write a letter. We are not going to call. We are going to let them file, and then we are going to court. Derek Whitmore filed the foreclosure action on March 14, 2026. He filed it without a phone call, without a warning, without a final meeting. He thought he was finishing the job. Mitchell Crane did not request a settlement conference. He did not answer Derek's demand letters. He filed a counterclaim, sealed the 1968 document as a key exhibit, and requested an expedited hearing before the Honorable Catherine Pruitt, 22 years on the Giles County bench. The hearing was set for a Wednesday morning in April. The courtroom was wood-paneled, high-ceilinged, with long, narrow windows that let the spring light fall in slanting columns across the floor. Derek Whitmore arrived in a dark navy suit and a silver tie. His Nashville attorney, a woman named Sloan Harrington, sat beside him with a leather briefcase and a laptop. Two paralegals sat in the row behind them. Harold Tate sat at the other table in a clean blue shirt, his canvas jacket folded over the back of his chair. Mitchell Crane sat beside him with a single manila folder. Judge Pruitt entered at 9 a.m. sharp. Counselor Harrington, she said, your motion is to foreclose. Please proceed. Sloan Harrington spoke for 21 minutes. She was polished. She was efficient. She cited current banking law, successor institution statutes, and what she called the clear unenforceability of unilateral perpetual obligations. She described the 1968 agreement as a handshake document, drafted in an era before modern commercial standards. She finished with a small professional smile. Thank you, Counselor, Judge Pruitt said. Mr. Crane. Mitchell Crane stood up slowly. He carried his manila folder to the bench. He opened it. Your Honor, the bank's position rests on one assumption, that the 1968 agreement is a loan document. He paused. It is not. The room was very quiet. It is a sale of 2 acres from Walter Tate to First Pulaski Bank in exchange for binding covenants. Covenants which the bank and every successor institution accepted when they accepted the land. The bank has owned that 2 acres for 57 years. They built their drive-through on it. They have collected revenue on it. They have paid property tax on it. They have never returned it. He placed page 4 in front of the judge. Page 4, paragraph 3, Your Honor, if you would. Judge Pruitt took the page. She put on her glasses. She read. She read it twice. She looked up at Sloan Harrington. Counselor Harrington, has your client read page 4 of the document they are attempting to void? Sloan Harrington hesitated. Your Honor, we have examined the agreement in full. That is not what I asked, Counselor. Judge Pruitt's voice was calm and cool. Has your client, Mr. Derek Whitmore, personally read page 4, yes or no? Derek leaned forward. I, Your Honor, our legal team. Mr. Whitmore, did you read page 4 before you filed this foreclosure? The courtroom was silent. I did not, Your Honor, in its entirety. Judge Pruitt set the page down. Mr. Whitmore, you filed a foreclosure action against a 76-year-old man on land that has been in his family for 4 generations, based on a document that you did not read. Is that a correct summary of this morning's proceedings? Derek's neck was red above his collar. Your Honor, the document is. Yes or no, Mr. Whitmore? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Pruitt turned back to Mitchell Crane. Counselor Crane, your counterclaim. Your Honor, we move for the liquidated damages specified in the covenant itself. 3 times the appraised value of the 240 acres as established by certified appraisal dated March 28, 2026. Total sum, $3,540,000, payable within 30 days. Counselor Harrington response. Sloane Harrington stood. She opened her mouth. She closed it. Your Honor, we would respectfully request a recess to consult with our client. No, counselor, you have had 57 years to consult with your client. The covenant is clear. The breach is clear. The damages are clear. Judge Pruitt picked up her pen. The motion to foreclose is denied. The counterclaim is granted. Meridian Capital Partners, as successor to First Pulaski Bank, shall pay to Harold J. Tate the sum of $3,540,000 within 30 days of this order. The 1968 covenant shall remain in full force until the year 2067. This court is adjourned. She struck the gavel once. Harold Tate had not spoken a single word in the courtroom. He picked up his jacket, he put on his cap, and he walked out into the spring sunshine. 11 days later, Derek Whitmore was terminated from Meridian Capital Partners. The internal memo called it a restructuring of the regional leadership team. Everyone in the Nashville office knew what it was. He was escorted from the building on a Thursday afternoon by two people he used to supervise. His LinkedIn page went dark within a week. Sloane Harrington was reassigned to a compliance desk. The check arrived at Mitchell Crane's office on April 29, 2026, $3,540,000. Mitchell deposited it into a client trust account, deducted his fee, which he quietly reduced by a third because his father had helped draft the original covenant, and he would not profit on his father's honor, and cut Harold a cashier's check for $3,212,000. Harold drove the check to his bank in Columbia, not First Pulaski, and deposited it without comment. He paid his property tax for the year. He paid the one small debt he owed the feed store. He sent $100,000 to his son David in Knoxville, who wept on the phone for 15 minutes. He sent another $50,000 to the volunteer fire department that had come the night of Margaret's stroke. The rest he put away for the farm. Within a month, Mitchell Crane's phone began to ring. A widow in Lincoln County holding a 1973 agreement with a savings and loan. A farmer in Marshall County holding a 1981 letter from a lender. A retired schoolteacher in Pulaski holding a 1969 receipt her husband had told her never to throw away. Mitchell took each call. He read each document. Some were nothing, some were everything. In the town of Pulaski, in the diners and the hardware stores and the feed mills, men began to speak in lowered voices about Harold Tate, about the 1968 contract, about page 4, about the banker from Nashville who had called it worthless. Harold, for his part, did not discuss it. When asked, he said only, "My daddy told me what to do, I did it." On a quiet evening at the end of April, he drove home from town on the same two-lane road he had driven for half a century. The sun was low, the dogwoods were in bloom, the old 1994 Ford rattled the way it always rattled. He pulled into his gravel drive, he turned off the engine, he sat for a long moment with his hands on the steering wheel. He did not feel triumphant, he did not feel vindicated, he felt mostly tired. And beneath the tiredness, something quieter and older. A kind of peace, the kind a man feels when he has, at long last, done exactly what his father asked him to do. On a Sunday morning in early May, Harold Tate walked up the hill behind the farmhouse. He wore his old canvas jacket, he carried his cap in his hand. The oak tree his father had planted in 1952 stood 74 years old now, thick-trunked and broad-crowned, its new spring leaves pale green against the Tennessee sky. Beneath it were two graves. Margaret's stone was newer, cleaner. The grass had grown back over it now, 6 years on. His father's stone was older, weathered gray, chipped at one corner. Walter Jefferson Tate, 1915 to 1971. Harold stood between the two graves for a long time. Then he knelt slowly on his bad knee. He put his hand flat on the top of his father's stone. "Daddy," he said. He did not say anything else for a while. The wind moved through the oak leaves. Somewhere down in the bottom pasture, a cow called for her calf. "You were right, Daddy, you were right about all of it." He took a breath. "They came just like you said they would, and they laughed just like you said they would, and I did what you told me. I kept my mouth shut, I let the paper talk." He was quiet again. The farm's safe until 2067. Long after I'm gone, David's boy will have it, and his boy after him. He did not cry. Harold Tate was not a crying man. But he stayed there on his knee for a long time with his hand on his father's stone, while the wind moved through the leaves of the tree Walter Tate had planted 74 springs ago, knowing he would not live to sit beneath it. And that perhaps is the quiet truth of men like Walter Tate. They do not plant for themselves, they do not build for the moment. They sign papers in 1968 that they will never collect on, and they teach their sons the words that will one day unmake the men who underestimate them. They plant trees they will never sit under. They dig wells they will never drink from. They write clauses on page 4 of contracts no one will read until 57 years after they are dead. And then, in the patient accounting of things, the earth balances itself. A farmer walks his land at sunset. A son keeps a promise. A father somewhere is right. If stories like this still mean something to you, stories of quiet men, long memories, and the legacies that outlast the arrogance of the powerful, subscribe to Acre Stories. Next time, a widow in eastern Kentucky opens a locked tin box her husband left her in 1994. Inside is a single mineral rights deed, and the oil company that just bulldozed her back 40 is about to learn who really owns the coal seam beneath their feet. We'll see you there.